do pop it into the chat box for us. And we'll close the poll, Paul, thank you. And if we can share those results as well. So we can see that there's a great spread there, and the majority of people are looking at hearing nationwide updates and also supporting other colleagues and learning from the speakers. And we've got G there being part of the wider community. So if you are joining and you want to know more about the wider community, then we are launching a platform soon where you can do just that, as well as joining these sessions. So welcome to this session. And it's lovely to see everybody just saying where they're from and what they do in the chat box. So please use the chat box throughout the session so that we can answer some of those questions that you might have, but also to add to the content within our session today. So hello, my name is Zoe Lord and welcome to this Wellbeing webinar, all about the recovery phase, how we recover as a team throughout this active period. My slides have started moving on their own, but let's not worry about that. So the aim of this session today, so all of our sessions, they're all about offering support, ideas, knowledge and wisdom to those who have a role in supporting the health and well-being of our health and care people. And today we're going to be focusing on this recovery phase, how we recover together. We're going to be sharing lots of wellbeing support activities as we do on our other sessions as well, and really thinking about how we connect together and build our supportive community together.
So I'd like to welcome all of you to this session again. My name is Elizabeth Nyawade and I'll be facilitating today with Zoe. We have a great lineup for you today again. We'll hear for an update on the national support that is on offer from Dr. Sonia. And we will also hear about the recovery phase, learning from the Manchester bombing, and that will be from Professor Prathiba. And we will also hear about the recovery phase from Colonel Ali. And there'll also be a section on In Conversation with Sonia and all this, Helen Bevel facilitating a session with all the speakers. And then we will bring it to an end with a call to action and closing remarks. And today, I will be facilitating the session with Zoe. And our contributors are Dr. Sonia, Colonel Ali, Dr. Prathiba, and Helen Bevan. And behind the scenes to help facilitate the session today, we also have on the technical side, we have Paul, Selena, Tej, and Zara. And on the chat box, we have Rosanna, and we also have Louise and Karen. And on the social media, we have Lee, who will be tweeting throughout the session today. Thank you, Lee. And we also have Oli, who will be facilitating on YouTube. Welcome, everybody. And to kick off our session, we will hear an update on all that is happening nationally to support us on the well-being agenda. And just before we welcome Dr. Sonia to lead us on this section, I just want to take a moment to say a huge thank you for all the work you have done, Dr. Sonia, you and team, in such a short space of time to bring about a lot of initiatives and facilities to support our colleagues throughout the country at this very difficult time. Over to you, Dr. Sonia. Thank you.
Oh, thanks, Elizabeth. And Sonia is just fine. Can I have the next slide? Thank you. So I just wanted to share with you our updated offer on a page. You will see from here that we've got the text line and we've got the helpline that the Samaritans are helping us man. But the other thing we've done this week is we've now got a number specifically for Hospice UK who are there to support yourselves or colleagues within the NHS around any bereavement issues, loss, end of life care that you maybe want specific support with. So we've taken a decision to offer that number out as well, so that people don't feel that they have to be going through to the Samaritan's line if that's the specific need you have. So again, would encourage you. We've got more updates on the people.nhs.uk website this week, and I'll just tell you a little bit more in a second about what's coming up on there. That's going to be the space with all of the latest information around what's coming up. So again, one to watch. We've got Practitioner Health. I just wanted to do a big shout out for Practitioner Health. They have been supporting us very much in the background at the moment, putting on webinars. They're doing yoga, choir lessons, you name it, they've got it. Some real nice stuff in there. So again, would encourage you just to click on that link and see what's available. Still got the apps. Silver Cloud this week have updated and introduced an anxiety module specifically related to COVID. So again, whether you're learning for yourself or wanting to work it through for colleagues, that's a really good one to do. And this forthcoming week, we're going to be piloting our common rooms. So these are hosted spaces where you can meet with colleagues. Some will be open, some will be around specific groups meeting, but I will let you know the link to that next week and how that pilot's gone. Can I have the next slide, Zoe, please? Thank you. So I just wanted to share with you, we've had nearly 1,000 calls to the helpline and 400 plus conversations on the text line. At this stage, we're kind of asking ourselves, you know, should there be more? Should people be picking that phone up a bit more often? And I think what we know about our workforce is we're not great at seeking help. We'll be the last ones to pick the phone up. So again, I would encourage you, what we know from previous studies, and we'll hear from Prathiba later, is that it will probably come a bit more when things are more settled and we're out of that active phase. But I would really be, you know, working with colleagues, making sure that we're doing that active watching so people are getting the support that we need. What we know, what's coming out from the calls is, you know, still very much anxiety and fear. PPE continues to dominate those conversations. We're working with Relate at the moment, and CAB are running that's Citizens Advice Bureau, sorry, are running a small pilot for us in the southeast so that we can learn about the financial and more practical help side of things. So again, hopefully in the next week, some further offers to add there. Thanks, Zoe. So I wanted to share with you the just some early thinking around the recovery stage that we're doing. So you will see from my little chart that most people are in the active phase or kind of moving towards the active phase. So this is the bit where we're kind of all consumed with the work in itself. Quite difficult to pay attention to your own physical and psychological well-being because it's all about the work. We know that following this time, there will be a rest phase and a phase of, you know, what have I just been through? How have I managed that? Wow, you know, that was hard. What we have to do as a system is really think about our sickness policies, our time off policies. We have to give people a chance to recover from the work that they've been doing. We cannot just go back in to our next peak, which will of course be full system recovery. How do we get back to the throughput that we're going to need to concentrate on to catch up with the work that we've suspended? We know that there's a narrative running right now around, you know, NHS as heroes, and that's great to celebrate the work that ourselves and colleagues are doing. There is a downside. It is a double-edged sword to that, in that once the clapping stops and perhaps we're keeping people waiting a little bit longer, are we then really at risk of, what is the work to me now? Nobody's clapping me. I'm being criticised for not being quick enough. So managing public expectations about service levels and what's practical and we're capable of will be really important. We'll then see the kind of activity level demand begin to settle. Again, we're talking swathes of time here. This is not a quick process. And what we'll end up with is those staff who maybe haven't been so fortunate that they're able to recover themselves, that there will be the sort of 30% we think of staff who will need some specific mental health support. So we're really turning our attention to thinking about that. One of the things that we've learned, again, just through the Manchester bombings and other incidents of that nature, is that there's a real intolerance around people who are, maybe it takes them longer to recover. Maybe they're not the people who come back to work straight away and they need a bit more time. So again, the management of the recovery phase as an individual process is something we're really going to need to give some thought to. Not everybody's going to recover from this quite quickly and be able to return to the kind of place that's traumatized them. So again, something to think about. Thanks, Zoe. So we put this into a frame of what activities that we think will need to happen. And again, early thinking. So I'd really value your comments and feedback. We know that we need to give people opportunities to tell us what's happening, and we want to be able to do that as local as possible. So enabling our local systems to really support and listen to staff and what they need is going to be really, really helpful. I've called it vulnerable groups, and that's probably my language, but just what we mean from that are really paying attention right now to people who are more at risk of having a negative psychological outcome. So perhaps you've returned back from service and you feel that you've been thrown right there in the heart of it, and then you exit back out again quickly. Where's your system? Who's gonna look after you in that phase? Or perhaps you're living in this country doing work here, but your family and your usual support system is in a different country. So how can we help think with you about what that support system might look like? We have a couple of papers which I'd be more than happy to circulate that go into a bit more detail on this. And again, you know, with a view to looking for feedback. What we want to be able to do is give people enough time. We know that these processes are not quick. So all of our commissioning around the helpline, the text line, we're really wanting that to be an extended period. We know that we need to get people who need help to seek access in a way that supports them. So that rapid intervention at the right time is going to be really important. And also that they're able to come back to work in a way that suits them. I know that we talked with Michael a couple of weeks ago about compassionate and inclusive leadership, Michael West. But again, the way that we manage this, the experience that people have of our leadership style during the recovery phase will leave a legacy. We need to be supporting our teams. We need to be supporting individuals to be the best that they can be and return back into a thriving state, focusing on our team functioning and how well we work together if we're going to come out of this successful as a system. Thanks, Zoe.
Thank you, Sonia. Really useful information there and a constant reminder of where we are in this journey. It's useful to hear how we are utilizing the available support across the available nationally and also to each other. Also, a really useful reminder there for the leadership team in terms of how we lead the teams going forward. Thank you very much. I'm going to ask Paul now to take us to a poll. If I hand over to you, Paul. Yeah, we're just going to run this poll very quickly to check in with you guys on how you are feeling prepared for the recovery phase. So over to you guys. Just take a moment there to let us know how you're feeling in terms of preparing for the recovery phase.
Okay, thank you. We've had 70 people answer it so far, so I can see people are engaging with the poll at the moment. As you can see, the poll question is, to what extent are you thinking about the recovery phase of wellbeing now? Ranging from 1, which is we're currently at the peak of the active phase and we haven't started planning, to number 5, which is we are already putting actions and support services in place. So we'll just allow another 15 seconds or so to make sure everyone's had the opportunity. And anyone who can't answer or are viewing on YouTube, if you'd like to post the message in chat and we can pick it up that way as well.
Thank you, Paul.
And I'll put the results up on screen now for you.
Right, so that's a lot of people there with number 3. I can't see what number 3 referred to. Paul, do you have it in front of you to read it out for us again?
Number 3 is in the middle of the scale. So
Okay.
number 1, which is people are currently at the peak and they haven't started looking for the recovery yet, to number 5, which is they're already putting actions and support services in place.
Okay.
And most people are in between those 2 points.
Yeah, timely. So this is a really good time to start thinking about what the next phase will be. As we continue these sessions, we'll keep picking this up. Thank you, Paul. And we'll just turn to the chat room to see, to get some reflections there on what's coming through in the chat rooms. If I start with you, Rosanna, and then Ollie will also share what's coming through in the chat rooms.
Great, thank you, Elizabeth. Yes, it has been non-stop in the chat room, so thank you everybody for your contributions. I would say, first of all, there's been a lot of connections being made between people. There's emails being shared, there's Twitter handles being shared, so that's fantastic. There is a lot of interest in the slides, getting access to those, and also the papers. Deb would like some papers as well, Sonia. There's a lot of tips being shared, so do keep those coming. And there are also other offers of resources, free resources to support recovery being made here across the system. So do keep that coming, and I'll leave it there for now. Thank you, Elizabeth.
Over to you, Ollie, if you share with us what's coming through on YouTube.
So on YouTube, it's fair to say it's probably a little quieter than the chat on Zoom, but there's lots of people introducing themselves, and similarly, just with that survey question that you asked, people kind of, I think, generally reflecting the same as what we discovered through Zoom about people sort of around the three mark. Linda pointing out, she's kind of, based remotely, she's not on site, so not entirely sure kind of how the rest of the team are responding. But I think as the conversations develop, there'll be more to report back from YouTube.
Thank you, Ollie. Can you have the next slide? So we're now going to hear from Professor Prathiba, who will share with us views on the recovery phase. I will pass over to you, Professor Prathiba, to introduce yourself and just talk to us about some of the work you're doing on this piece of work. Thank you.
Thanks, Elizabeth. So really delighted to be part of this webinar. And hello from sunny Manchester, everyone. Rarely do you kind of get to use those 2 words together in a sentence. So my background's a little bit mixed. I work as a clinician in Greater Manchester. I was also involved with colleagues in developing the mental health response to the Manchester MEN incident in 2017. And I want to kind of share some of the learning from that particular experience. And my other part of my role is actually as a clinical advisor to the NHS England mental health policy team. So we've really tried to take the learning from Manchester and London to input to national guidance. So some of you will be aware that the EPRR mental health guidance has just been published, which includes some of that learning. So if I just start by just touching on what happened in Manchester, and some of you might sort of remember the Manchester bomb from 2017. So on the 22nd of May, a suicide bomber detonated a device at the MEN Arena concert, killing himself and 22 other young people and adults and injuring 239 others. And as a Greater Manchester Health and Social Care Partnership, a number of us came together and really kind of tasked very quickly to develop a support offer for young people, for adults and professionals. And it was a real challenge for us because there were 19,500 people there at the concert, and they really were spread across the whole of the north of England. So trying to take the learning from research, trying to kind of interpret that and kind of implement a number of clinical care pathways was a challenge. We pulled something together very quickly. We shared that with colleagues from London, where very shortly afterwards, you might remember we had Grenfell and the London Bridge incident. And over the last sort of 2 to 3 years, we've been working very closely with London colleagues in thinking about evaluation. We developed an outreach screening programme as part of Manchester, and we've got some really rich data. So we've got 3,500 young people and adults, including professionals, who registered as part of that screening programme. And we've also undertaken some really good qualitative interviews, which I'll kind of touch on some of the learning from that. So if we kind of synthesise some of the kind of key points, and Sonia's already touched on this, I'm sure it's come up in previous webinars. What we know around professionals and the impact of major incidents is they're less likely to identify themselves as having mental health needs. They're less likely to engage in a mental health screening programme, and they're also less likely to kind of take up traditional mental health support offers or wellbeing support offers. And I'm sure we can kind of all reflect or think about some of the different reasons for that. And that might include concerns around getting on with a job at hand, kind of because we know there'll be lots of kind of needs and demand on professionals, but actually also concerns around stigma and what colleagues or other professionals might think if they identify themselves as having mental health needs. There's lots of different reasons for that. Can we move on to the next slide? So just thinking about some of the kind of learning from the impact, we know that most of us are going to, even if we have stress, even if we're kind of challenged, most of us are going to recover, particularly with support from friends and family members and colleagues. So the pyramid there just really tries to kind of identify people with needs at different levels. We know that some individuals, some professionals are going to develop some mental health symptoms, and a proportion of those are going to develop mental health needs. And the range of, I guess, symptoms and needs that people are going to present with will really kind of change over the course of the next few months. So at the moment, we're seeing high levels of anxiety and distress. And I have to say that I'm seeing that clinically with colleagues that I work with. So concerns around PPE, concerns about their own health and the potential impact of the exposure, but actually also worries about how family members might be affected. Over the next few weeks and months, I think we're going to see a change in some of those presentations. So people developing potentially anxiety disorders, so generalized anxiety disorders, maybe PTSD, so post-traumatic stress symptoms, depression. It's also, I think, really important to emphasize that we're going to see people presenting with a whole range of symptoms and needs. So for some, the primary presentation might be an impact on sleep. For others, we might see them presenting with physical or somatic symptoms. We might see some professionals starting to maybe smoke more, drink more as a kind of coping mechanism. So it really is being aware that the presentations can be quite varied. And when we think about the support and the response, it's really thinking about how, if you look at the pyramid, we recognise and identify people at all of these different levels. So most individuals with support will have what we call a resilient response. But that's the majority of professionals. But we know that some will have some mild mental health symptoms or needs. So these might be short periods of anxiety, distress, but not significantly impacting on their functioning. And then we have a subgroup of professionals who are going to develop moderate severe mental health needs, where there is a real impact on their functioning, and they really do need access to evidence-based treatments. That might be psychological treatments, and we've got lots of evidence-based treatments that they can access, or it might be medication. And then we have a smaller subgroup of professionals that might present in a crisis where they may be at risk to themselves, and that includes professionals that may be at risk of self-harm and suicide. So really, really important as a system how we think about identification and support for professionals at all of those different levels. Could we move on to the next slide? So if we think about some of the kind of key principles about the approach to take, and again, this is really taking the learning from Manchester and London and other incidents, is the need to think about a graduated or stepped approach. So as we developed our clinical care pathways, we were really clear that we needed to think about needs at different levels. How do you continue to support staff remaining resilient? So all the psychoeducation information, all the kinds of normalisation, validation messages, the signposting to information, really important. The next kind of key principle is the idea that we really need flexible and culturally sensitive support. I think this is incredibly important. So what we know about professionals and support for professionals is there is not going to be a one-size-fits-all offer here. So the idea that we really need to listen and co-produce the type of support that we provide. So we know that not everyone wants support within their organisation. Some professionals prefer support that's external, so the really important role of primary care here, but actually also support anonymously. So the role of national helplines, but actually also other psychological support. So Sonia sort of mentioned the common room, and again, I think we can kind of discuss that in some of the conversations later. Sonia also kind of touched on support for BME colleagues. So we know that the BME community make up about 20% of our healthcare workforce. And again, I think it's ensuring that we provide support that's culturally sensitive. So we know that actually BME colleagues might want support that's very different. And it really is about listening to the kind of support that they want and not assuming that we know what support they want. And we have a number of staff networks to be able to kind of really tap into that. The third kind of key principle is really thinking about a system response. Now, this is incredibly important because this is where we can support that kind of resilient response. And I'm sure in some of the previous webinars, Michael and others will have talked about the support through colleagues, through line managers. And Sonia's touched on some of the real risks we've got at the moment, that we are anticipating that needs and demand on services is going to increase very quickly. And there will be a real pressure on professionals and organisations to get back to business as usual. And the challenge for us as system leaders is really giving staff and teams the support and space to kind of decompress, to process what's happened, to listen, to reflect. And we've touched, I'm sure, on Schwartz rounds, reflective groups, to think about what's worked well, but some of the learning, what's not gone well and how we can kind of take some of that learning into future incidents. And also thinking about real compassionate support, I think, is really, really important. Again, Sonia's touched on some of the learning that we've had from Manchester, that professionals, their colleagues, team leaders were really quite supportive in the short term. But because I think as a system, we're so aware of being able to respond, there was a pressure really to get back to work very quickly. And what that meant was that some people came back to work before they were ready, and that actually led to longer periods of sick leave. So really giving people the space to actually recover, I think, is going to be really, really important. And we know, and I'm sure that people who work in teams will have witnessed this. When you work in a team and you know colleagues well, you know which colleagues are not doing well, the colleagues that do need a little bit of support. And being able to recognise that and being able to provide that support, I think, in a kind of reflective way, in a flexible way, I think is really important. The next key principle is really about support to staff members that we may describe as being more vulnerable to poor psychological outcomes. And the research suggests there might be particular groups that might be more at risk. So professionals that have pre-existing mental health needs, professionals who might be new to their role, people who may be new to teams, also professionals that have experienced secondary stresses. So again, some of the literature that we have from incidents like Manchester and London suggests that it might not be the initial primary incident that causes the problems. We tend to store up difficulties, and it might be secondary problems that really kind of push you over the edge here. So problems with finances, relationship difficulties, childcare issues, to really ensuring that people kind of ask those questions about secondary difficulties. Sonia also touched on support for BME colleagues, and we are kind of trying to understand whether they might be at greater risk for lots of different reasons. We know that our BME colleagues are maybe more exposed to trauma, racial discrimination, and also less likely to access traditional kind of mental health support offers. So really thinking about how we identify and support those colleagues, I think, is really important. I know we've got a dedicated webinar next week that is going to kind of touch on this in more detail. And the kind of final principle, just I think to highlight, again, taking the learning from Manchester and other incidents, is that the impact on professionals tends to be generally more delayed in comparison to the public. And this is going to be one of the challenges that I think we have as a system. Even with Manchester, we really struggle with this. It's really surprising how quickly the system wants to forget and move on from incidents. So on average, we found that it can take 3 to 7 years before we get a peak in the rise in mental health needs for professionals. And ensuring the system thinks and plans long term, I think, is going to be really important. I know we're having those conversations nationally, but at a local level, we really need to kind of plan that into our support offer. So my final top tip, I think, if I had to kind of summarise this, Elizabeth, was the real need to ensure that any support offer that you provide is flexible and culturally sensitive. So I'll finish there. Thank you very much, Elizabeth.
Thank you, Dr. Prathiba. I'll hand over to Zoe.
Thank you, and thank you both. And there were so many practical principles there that we can, really think about starting to prepare and to plan for the recovery phase. So thank you so much from all that learning that's come from the Manchester bombing and also other crises in the UK. Please do keep your messages coming into the chat box. I'd seen one in particular from Naomi Craft was asking about, where is the other knowledge coming from about the post-COVID response, and where are we drawing our knowledge and experience from? And I can answer that by saying there's lots and lots of places where we're drawing on sort of like the recovery phase, and I will ask Sonia to touch on that when she speaks shortly. But we've also been taking a lot of knowledge and learning from the armed forces, and we've built that into the whole of the national wellbeing response, because our military, they do support their staff in very special ways. They support their staff before, during and after deployment. And on that note, I've invited Colonel Ali Everest to speak to us today about what is the learning from the British Army about how you support their people and their personnel. So Ali, over to you.
Thank you very much. My name is Colonel Ali Everest. I'm an Army GP and I work for the health branch in Army headquarters. I'm very honoured to attend the session today, and I've already learned a great deal about the NHS plans and from the Manchester response, so thank you for that. This session is about the recovery phase, but military planning normally starts a long way before the decision to go to war. In this case, the war has come to us and the NHS is on the front line, and you haven't had that luxury of the preparation phase. So what I'm going to do is go through 3 slides that I've got and talk you through the GP version of some of the military planning process that we use. So military defence is based on the premise that if you want peace, you have to prepare for war. And so that's what we do. We train and we plan, and then we train some more. And this starts way before we go on any duties and deployments. Once we know that we're going to go somewhere, we then do a pre-deployment brief to explain to the troops what they can expect when they deploy. And this briefing reinforces that leadership, teamwork, and communication are the essential elements for success, and that people really need to look after themselves and others. At the end of the campaign, we have what we call the sort of coming home process that you can see on the slide there. So when we're leaving what's normally an overseas theatre of operations, we start by doing an exit operational stress management briefing. So that is to explain to people what they are going to go through emotionally as they come out of the war zone and return back to their families. Sometimes we have the opportunity to do formal decompression, and we call it third sector decompression. For example, in the Afghan years, we transited through Cyprus, and we had several days in Cyprus where people would literally sit on the beach together, drinking tea and talking through their experiences. And what was so fantastic about that is that they were still in the groups that they'd been in the difficult environment with, but they were shifting environment and staying together and talking through it. And they were supported by their welfare and pastoral teams. So once they come back into the UK, we then do a sort of normalisation process, which includes another briefing. And often this may be giving people what might seem to be sort of mundane tasks. So, you know, they're unpacking kit and cleaning weapons and things like that. Again, drinking lots of tea together and talking to each other and assimilating back into the climate, sometimes literally getting back to cold Britain after hot sunny places. The next step that we usually have, particularly if we've been on sort of 6 months deployments, is 2 weeks of or more of post-operational tour leaves. And that's essential because that's reintegrating people back with their families who've been coping without us while we're away. And they have an amazing role in returning us to be normal. So that's lots of talking and squabbling and playing with the children and just getting on with normal life. So that's the sort of initial process. And then at the 12-week point, we have a discussion with the chain of command. So that's what we call our line managers. And this is the opportunity for your line manager to ensure that there are no issues with you. And where possible, this debriefing is done by the chain of command because they're the people who are out there with you. And they're the ones who understand what you went through. So this is really valuable and gives you that sort of psychological safety. We also have, you can see it in the bottom of the slide there, something called trauma risk incident management. This is peer-to-peer review, and it's about supporting and signposting people. So each unit has got a number of people who are trained up as TRIM practitioners, and they're responsible for this process. And it's all about peers. I mentioned before about psychological safety. So things that you can say to somebody who's your peer and has been through the same things that you've just been through. And their job is checking in on you and giving you permission. So, you know, recognizing that it's okay to not be okay, but supporting you with signposting to expert help if the symptoms persist or if you need it. So we recognise with this COVID situation, it's not going to be a 6-month deployment. We're not going to have an obvious endpoint, and there's not going to be a coming home or, you know, leave for everybody. And, you know, the Army and the NHS are pretty busy before this crisis. And when it ends, there's not going to be a real holiday. People have spoken about the fact that, you know, there's going to be a backlog of cases to be dealt with. And it feels like we're going from 120% to the normal 110%. But we need to make space for people to rest and recover. We need to understand what they've been through. Some people fared better than others. Most people are okay. We've mentioned the TRIM process to keep an eye on people. But I think it's important to understand that people react differently. And sometimes this is due to the perception of threat, which is something we talk about in a military context, but is very, very real here, where people have been talking about the dangers that they feel to so many aspects of their life from COVID. So somebody who's doing a difficult task, maybe somebody who's a mortuary assistant in this crisis, might actually do really, really well emotionally because they've been well prepared, they recognise the value of their role, providing respect and dignity for the bereaved, and they're in a good team that's well led. Conversely, someone who's in an unfamiliar role at home with maybe less work responsibility or unwell but stuck in a confined space with a teenager may be at their wit's end. And we know from our military research that individuals may sometimes fare worse than those who deploy as formed teams. And this really illustrates the importance of leadership and teamwork in coping with this crisis. It's helpful if you go through it with your normal team, but we actually have the opportunity to build new teams that we're working in now that can help protect us. So I've mentioned leadership, and I'd like to just very briefly talk about army leadership. So this is a slide that distills down a fraction of the enormous amount that's written about army leadership. But to me, I think this is the two most important bits. So army leadership is a combination of character, knowledge, and action. It's no good being a marvelous person if you don't actually do something about it. And if you don't have the knowledge, then you can't act. So those three legs of the stool are essential. And also, I think the way it's written, it inspires others to succeed. The motto at Soundhurst is serve to lead. And I think the selfless organisation of the NHS has the same altruistic principles. The Army Leadership Code is a framework for leadership behaviour, and it builds on our military values and standards, which you can see on this slide. These are probably very familiar to people in the NHS because there's so much in common between the NHS and the military. A friend of mine sent me some alternatives, and he said that at the minute what we need is kindness, tolerance and flexibility, and I think certainly at the minute those three are probably what we need. I need to also stress that leadership is not just about the senior officers directing a campaign. This is leadership at all levels, just as it was in Afghanistan when we had the strategic corporals leading patrols out on the ground, making critical decisions and really looking after the team. Recently, the Army Sergeant Major sent a message to all the junior non-commissioned officers, telling them that they're the linchpins of the Army, and never more so than in this current crisis. And he charged them with the responsibility of looking after their teams and not to underestimate the value of a kind word or a phone call to check in on people. So the final slide, one of the projects that we're working on now is, thank you, is a mental health project called OpSmart. And this slide is an illustration of the mental resilience training concept that we're working on. And it shows the 7 pillars of the house that make up your mental resilience. And we use this model to consider how these are affected for each individual. And these circumstances and what we need to do collectively as a team to rebuild these pillars. And you can see the little boxes at the bottom, little circles at the bottom. And these are the 5 skills that we talk about: setting goals for the team. And you can see there, thinking positive, emotional control, anxiety regulation, and mental rehearsal. And these are mental fitness training skills that we learn. So you can train yourself to be mentally fit. And we think this provides a framework to understand what stresses we're experiencing and how to combat this. So to finish, we believe that there should be a recovery process which recognises leadership and understands mental fitness. We recognise that we need to recover as a team, and that we need to stay together, we need to acknowledge what we're all feeling, and we need to communicate with one another. Basically, it's about looking after yourself and your team whilst being courageous, demonstrating the integrity and selfless commitment, the values that the NHS and the military have in common.
Wow, thank you so much, Colonel Ali. Really, really much appreciated. For you sharing your experience and what happens in the military. I'm now going to hand over to Helen Bevan, who's going to lead a conversation with our speakers.
Yeah, thank you, Zoe, and hi everybody. My name is Helen Bevan, and I work in the Horizons team. And my job now is to work with for a short period of time our 3 fantastic speakers from this afternoon, and try and make it feel like a conversation. So what I thought I would do to start with, so it feels like a conversation, is to ask each of our speakers to just make a reflection on something that they heard from the other speakers. So Prathiba, I'm going to ask you to go first. Will you reflect on something you heard from Sonia that spoke to you?
I think the thing that kind of spoke to me from Sonia's presentation was really the consideration that had gone into thinking about the breadth and the variation in the support offers. And I know this is one of the things that we've really had to think about nationally, but we also need to think about locally. There were one of the things that hopefully we'll get to talk about is the common room offer. So we've had conversations about the support for professionals who might have some mental health symptoms, not enough needs to require a mental health intervention, but actually need some support. And that really was some of the learning that we had from Manchester, that there was a big group of people that actually were what we would call sub-threshold for formal psychological interventions, but did need some support, and really having to think about an accessible support offer for that group. So I'm really pleased that that's been really helpful.
Yeah, fantastic response. And Sonia, I'm going to ask you to go next. So will you reflect on something that you heard from Colonel Ali?
Yeah, just to say thank you, Colonel Ali, because I know coming on today was going to be really valuable, but from what I heard, it really did chime so many bells in terms of what we're trying to share with people. For me, kindness, tolerance and flexibility are not 3 words that you'd expect to hear from a colonel in the British Army. So that is refreshing, and absolutely the message around our compassionate and inclusive leadership, that we're saying, you know, before everything, we can have amazing national offers, but actually if your leadership on the ground, your experience of your team every day is not kind, tolerant and flexible, actually we're on a hiding to nothing. So let's start there. Oh, you've muted.
Hi, Helen.
Muted, yeah. Hi, yeah, Colonel Ali, can you reflect on something that you heard from Prathiba?
Okay, yes, I'd like to pick up on what Prathiba said about secondary problems. And I think in the military, I think sometimes there's a perception that we're all mad, bad or sad, and that actually just by putting our green uniforms on every day, we all have PTSD. And Prathiba, your comment about secondary problems, that actually it may not be, you know, the immediacy of the, you know, the threat to life from the virus, but it's about coping with your difficult teenager or losing your job or, you know, all those things. And certainly, you know, as a GP in the military, when people come and see me, sometimes the stimulus to come and see me about mental health issues is because of an issue related to work, but normally it's not. It's just life. And actually, several people have made the comment that, you know, a lot of us have put our lives on hold whilst we're dealing with the immediacy of this. But there's only a certain amount of time before all those things are going to catch up with us. And so in the aftermath to this, it may not be that people need help with, you know, dealing with their thoughts of mortality in relation to the virus. It's about the practical problems of sorting out, you know, the child who's fallen behind in their lessons, or, you know, the relationship that's strained by living in a small house without a garden together. And I think those sort of real life is the, you know, the stressor that we will face, and therefore that is what we need to deal with.
Thank you so much. And you know, when listening to all 3 of your presentations, and also looking at what we're seeing in the chat box, one theme that's coming over really strongly is the importance of peer-to-peer support. From Prathiba talked about common rooms, we've got wobble rooms in the chat box. Would all of you like to say something about the role of peer-to-peer support? And Prathiba, do you want to go first again, just because I think you specifically wanted to talk about common rooms? Can we hear Prathiba? Okay, I'm going to tell you what. I'll Sonia. Then, will you? What aspect of peer-to-peer support would you like to talk about?
So yeah, a couple of things. So we are commissioning Neil Greenberg and the team to give us some rapid training around peer-to-peer support. Again, what we recognise that it's not always the line manager that is available or the right person to have an end of shift conversation with. And what we want to do is make sure that teams really are getting the best experience. So before you go home, you've got someone to have that conversation with, but also it's been done. Neil, I'm going to steal your thunder now. So it's a REACT program that it's called, but it's done in a structured way. So it's not just an open-ended conversation that inadvertently strays into a psychological debriefing. It's a specific method of having a conversation that keeps it nice and safe for people.
Great, thank you, Sonia. Prathiba, have we got you now? You there? You have Prathiba? So I'm going to go on to Ali. So Colonel Ali, again, you talked about the importance of peer-to-peer processes. When we think about that in the context of the NHS, what can actually we take from your experience?
I think certainly there's been several people within the NHS and things like St John's Ambulance who are using the principles of the TRIM system, where you have people who are given a degree of training. And it's not so much that you suddenly become the expert, it's so that you become somebody who's emotionally intelligent enough to recognise what the other person is going through. And in some ways within the NHS, you already have a population who are, good at talking to each other and good at recognising those non-verbal cues and understanding where someone's under pressure. And someone mentioned it earlier, that actually most of the problem is about giving yourself permission and being kind and recognising that you will need that yourself as well. And so, and I mentioned about psychological safety, and I think, again, going back to leadership, if the leaders say that it's okay for everybody to have these conversations and recognise and illustrate that they're having them too, then I think that filters down through the organisation and encourages that openness to look within ourselves and to look to others to see how we can support each other. And that's what the peer-to-peer support is all about, just looking out for you and your friends.
Yeah, so powerful. One of the issues that we're seeing in threads in the chat room is, a lot of our talk about recovery are people on active service. So, the equivalent are staff at the point of care. We've also got thousands of staff who are under stress, working from home, socially isolated, uncertain. So in terms of the recovery concepts that we've been and principles and practices that we've been talking about today, can we relate those to people who are socially isolated, at home, often fearful now, and the kind of recovery that they need to make? Sonia, would you like to start that one?
Yeah, so I think again, one of the things that we've learned is that it's not about whether you're actually on the front line or you're close to the front line. Actually, the kind of worst psychological outcomes were coming from people who were very far removed from the incident. Almost, you'd signed up for the front line, you were maybe more prepared, you knew what to expect. So I think we absolutely need to be paying attention to the silence, the quietness. Where are your colleagues, especially the quiet ones in this space? It's very difficult to pay attention to people virtually, especially if they choose to be avoidant of the situation. So just watch out for the silence, be paying attention to your team functioning. Don't get out of the habit of doing the things that you would normally do around team times, coming together, having meetings. We try and have a coffee time once a week at least, just to reach out and listen to people. But it's definitely about just spending some time in that C bit, that kind of connecting bit of people. How do I know what you need if I don't talk to you? Don't make assumptions that because people have not been donning the uniform and the PPE that they're not going to be as effective as their colleagues who have.
Yeah, thank you. I think very, very, very wise words. And Colonel Ali, what can we take from your learning to our thousands of staff who've been, working virtually from home, who maybe you know, struggling.
I think I was going to use an example earlier about, is your example, but people who are working in an ITU department who may be used to that pressure and are working effectively as a team, and it's the normal team and everything, that they might cope very well, whereas somebody who's in an unfamiliar environment, and for us, you know, the people who are frontline infantry troops who are used to being on the ground, you know, that is their bread and butter. Whereas when you get somebody who, you know, gets sort of dropped into that situation for whom it's not their normal, those people, as I say, we know that they find it, their perception of the problem is sometimes more. One of the things, just before this, we had a Skype tea session with our team, and actually there was more sympathy for the lad who was at home dealing with a toddler than for the, you know, somebody who was out there actually doing, you know, testing or whatever. And I think just recognizing the immense contribution of the entire team and the value of the team. And I think I learned that as a junior doctor, where when we did ward rounds, you know, we used to then go for, you know, for tea afterwards, and the consultant used to call the cleaner in. And, you know, the cleaner used to sit and have tea with us and used to actually say, you know, did you realise that, you know, Mrs. Jones in bed number 4, that's what's going on with her. And so recognising that the hugely valuable contribution of every single part of the team, not just those who are, you know, donned up in gowns and doing the sharp end stuff. I think that's really important.
Oh, I think your values and your philosophy absolutely shine through, and I think are so relevant to us. We're just about out of time with our conversation, but I do need to give Prathiba, I need to give you the last word. So we just lost you there for a little bit, but we're really glad you're back. And what would you like to have said? And this will be the end of our conversation.
I'm sorry about that. I
no,
think
don't worry.
The risk of not charging your laptop battery very well. I think it's just, I guess, reiterating some of the messages that we've just heard about how we support some of our staff in different settings. So we've had staff that have been shielded, we've had staff that have been redeployed into different settings. And the things that we've tried to do, and I'm sure lots of organisations and teams have tried to do, is that we have a daily team huddle. And we call it, you know, kind of a virtual huddle where, irrespective of where we are, we have an opportunity every single day to kind of link in with each other, which has been incredibly important to stay connected. And the other thing that we've tried to do for people who are shielding, who are off for different reasons, we've made sure that either a peer or a line manager reaches out to them on a really, really regular basis. I think that's incredibly important to make sure that they are still in mind, even though they might not be there sort of physically.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you so much. And I mean, that time has just gone so quickly. And I think what was great for me about just your contributions there is this is the third in a series of these webinars now, and yet there's this kind of thread that is you know, that flows through all of them, which actually it's about, you know, if we lead really well, if we think about you know, what we're doing from the beginning, if we lead with values and kindness, if we put mechanisms into place to support people, then you know, that's going to make the biggest difference. So can we thank all of our brilliant speakers from today, and swiftly hand back over to Zoe and Elizabeth.
Thanks, Helen, and thanks, Sonia, Prathiba, and Colonel Ali. That was absolutely fantastic. And there's 1,000 thank yous coming into the chat box here as well. So please do have a look at those. A couple of final things from me. I'm not going to open a poll, but I'm going to ask you to pop these in the chat box for me. So to what extent has today's session been useful in your own role in supporting staff during COVID-19? So number 1, not helpful. Number 2, 3, 4, and 5 is very, very helpful. So if you are in YouTube, please do add them in there as well, and I can see them coming into the chat box as well. And you might want to put some whys in there as well. What we want to do is make sure we build on each and every one of these sessions, so they're giving you exactly what you need for your staff and your own well-being as well. I'd also like you to put in your chat box, you know, what topics would you like to see in the future, and what would make these sessions even better for you. Please do add these into the chat box so that we can continue to build on these sessions and really make it just what you need for you and for your staff, and also for your friends and family as well. What do you need? Please do tell us. So I'm going to, I've already spoken about our website, lots and lots of information going on there. Lots of information. We want to capture lots of data as well. We want to capture your experiences. So all of that information will be on our website. And Sonia offered to share some papers. What we're going to do is we will put those in the next newsletter. So please sign up for the newsletter. We'll put them in there and share them that way. And you can unsubscribe at any time. But I think that's the easiest way, as I think most people on the webinar wanted the papers, Sonia. So I think that that's the easiest way to share it. So sign up for the newsletter. We'll get it out to you and you can unsubscribe, and we won't give your details to anybody else. Finally, Elizabeth, our next session.
Yeah, so for our next session, we'll be focusing on listening to supporting our BAME colleagues throughout COVID and also beyond COVID. So we are really looking forward to most of you, as many of you as possible, joining us next week for our next session on Wednesday, the 29th of April from 4 to 5. And thank you all very much for your participation today. Thank you.
Thanks, Elizabeth. So that's a really important session next week. So please publicise it with your colleagues. What I'd like to do now is just to ask my colleague to stop sharing the screen. And what I want us to do is just, like, if you're happy to, there's a camera on button at the bottom. And what I'd really love to do is just give a visual thank you and wave to our fantastic speakers today. Sonia, Colonel Ali, Helen and Prathiba as well, and all of our helpers. So let's give them a little wave and a thank you or a clap, and put your cameras on. That is absolutely fantastic. And it's just lovely to see so many faces. Thank you so much for joining us. So, wow, there's hundreds of you. I'm just going through the screen and you can click right and left to see everybody as well. So, keep connecting with us, sign up on the newsletter, find out more about a new little website that we're developing, collecting your shared stories, and find out about all of our future webinars. So from me and the rest of the team, thank you so much for joining us. Take care and we'll see you soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.